This is the Jeff Santos Show.
3 minutes past the hour, it is the Jeff Santos Show that you're tuned into. And, just to sort of recap there, again, we got great friends at the Boston Globe, and they have great journalists there, as is the New York Times and our friends in Washington as well at the Post. But the folks, in a lot of these editorial departments, they have a lot of people on staff that are not, quote-unquote, progressive. And they may be on a social issue of, the women's rights, gay rights, that sort of thing. But when it comes to the idea of economic issues, they're always going to raise the question, oh, well, you're spending too much money. Yeah, you can't have that. Just be a team player. Well, because what that means is that the short end of the shrift, those who are economically not viable. Look it up on Falling Down, 1992, folks, with Michael Douglas. We may play some sound bites from that in a couple of weeks to come. That's what we're talking about. And that's why we need great progressive journalists like our next guest, who is Mr. 206. He is the guy at the piano. He's the guy on the microphone. He's the guy every Tuesday here on the Jeff Santos Show. And he is the journalist risking his life, tear-gassed, pepper-sprayed. He is our Renaissance man. He is MTC, Mark Taylor-Canfield, to those of you who want the full name. MTC, how are you, sir?
Well, the weather is terrible in Seattle, so please make sure you tell everybody that. It's been a horrible June. We've had very little sun. It's been raining most of the time. And so that's what you get in Seattle sometimes, folks. But the weather is also bad politically in the city hall, because now with the CHOP movement, the Capitol Hill organized protest is what they're calling themselves now, still holding 4 blocks around the East Precinct on Capitol Hill. The mayor just complained to the city council that she wants the city council to somehow get rid of or do something with Kshama Sawant, the Democratic Socialist City Council member, because Kshama Sawant led a demonstration to the mayor's house on Sunday, and the mayor took that very personally, and now she's calling for the resignation of Kshama Sawant. Meanwhile, Kshama Sawant and several council members and the protesters are calling for the resignation of Mayor Jenny Durkan. So it's a big political battle. And unfortunately, Jeff, another sad incident, another tragedy took place near the CHOP incident. Actually, two people in a Jeep Cherokee SUV drove through the protest encampment on Sunday night, firing shots at tents, allegedly.
Oh, no.
And they themselves were killed by security at the camp. So it's been just... Wow. Every few nights there's been some kind of strange incident way, early in the morning or late at night. Now, during the day, it seems like it's still very peaceful, place to go, when a lot of families have been hanging out there and people making art and creating protest signs and marching every night to the West Precinct and down to Interstate 5 and blocking it. The demands of the protesters have not yet been met. And the top 3 demands that I've seen lately are defunding the Seattle Police Department by 50%, taking that money and investing it in communities of color that have been redlined, and then dropping all the charges against peaceful protesters that were arrested. Or they're saying all the protesters. Now, the city attorney, Pete Holmes, he's a very progressive kind of guy, Jeff, and, the kind of guy you could have a beer with. He was in front of me in line when I was covering the opening of the first legal marijuana retail store in Seattle. Well, he was the first person in line. He and State Senator Marlon Chase bought some, and they were very proud, showing it off to everyone. So that's the kind of guy he is. Now, he's saying that he probably will drop the charges against protesters. And, bottom line for me, and I'm writing about this at the Seattle Star today, which, by the way, I need to give a plug to. Omar Wiley is doing an amazing, excellent job with that newspaper, which was the newspaper of record in Seattle up until, I think, the 1940s. But he has got a really talented group of writers there doing some really interesting, innovative, kind of edgy stuff. And so I sent him an article explaining what's going on. And the bottom line for me, Jeff, is that despite the tragedies, in no way do I want to dismiss the tragedy, the sadness, and the mourning that's going on at the camp because of these people that were killed. By the way, those two young men in the SUV in the Cherokee were black men, and they are both teenagers. One was 14. Wow. The 16-year-old was killed. Apparently, it was a stolen vehicle, but we don't have all the details yet. But in the middle of all this, there have been more complaints filed against the Seattle Police Department, even though they've been largely absent from the scene at the CHOP zone, and sometimes criticized for not being around when people were shot and needing assistance. But they have had up to 15,000, I think even more now, complaints filed against them through the Community Police Commission and the Office of Police Accountability. But apparently Carmen Best, the police chief, and the mayor are not concerned about that at all. They are more concerned about what's happening at CHOP, at the zone in the middle of Capitol Hill. And now we have a political battle between one of the city council members and the mayor that's heating up. So, there's a lot of stories, a lot of breaking stories coming out of Seattle. Some of them are really tragic and sad. Some of them are historic. Some of them are heroic. Now, the latest I can tell you is that as of about 9 o'clock this morning, now the mayor says she's going to dismantle CHOP. She's going to dismantle the camp. She's going to get everybody out. The police chief, Carmen Best, says not only does she want to use tear gas again, but she wants to get the police back into the East Precinct. And as of this morning, some Department of Transportation trucks showed up with police as security and removed some of the barriers in front of the East Precinct. The thing is that the protesters then build their own barriers, and the statement today to the press was that those barriers have actually protected people at the encampment. For instance, on Sunday night when that car came driving through, it actually smashed into a barrier near more tents that are set up outside the East Precinct. So people are saying that it actually may have saved lives. But, we also have many contradictory stories. We talked last time about Fox News photoshopping photos to make it look more dangerous than it was down there, and the Sinclair Broadcasting, owned KOMO TV, using its right-wing propaganda to try to dismiss the protesters. And the problem, Jeff, of course, always, and it's been the same problem in Seattle throughout the May Day riots and since the WTO demonstrations, is that when these other issues take away the attention from the real justified demands of the protesters, then it's very frustrating for them because, they've been out on the streets now for a month, and some of them have been living and staying at the CHOP zone, trying to get, their demands met and trying to get people to understand that the racism and police brutality in police departments around the country has got to stop. We saw another incident, Elijah, down in Aurora, Colorado, and his killing also caused a big stir. Right. And just the other day, police broke up a concert there using riot cops, which was just ridiculous.
Well, I think what we're seeing, and I think the evidence will be probably in Minneapolis, where you have a progressive champion like Keith Ellison, the Bernie supporter, almost the DNC chair, lost to Perez by 13 votes. So there's a lot of fixing going on in that one at the DNC level. But I'm his son is also on that city council that is not ready to fund it in terms of, complete, separation of police as we know it, but how they administer police duties is what really has to change. And there may be some possibilities there, because that's what's going to have to happen in Seattle. It's going to happen in police stations, particularly big cities around this country, if we're going to have any connection between people of color and police officers, which are predominantly white. Here in the United States of America, talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. I want to. I don't know if you've had a chance to think about this, and being on the ground and talking, to all the protesters on one side and police officials and mayor officials on the other side. But I think in a lot of ways, Seattle is kind of going through, sort of like where San Francisco was in the 1970s. Reading a book by our good friend Mr. Mitchell about that time period when Mr. Moscone was assassinated and Harvey Milk was assassinated and so forth, and gave us Dianne Feinstein, a more corporate till today in San Francisco. And I'm wondering, if there's a feeling on the ground in Seattle by young people, by elements of Black Lives Matter, that, this is really a fight for the soul of the city. You got the Amazon folks on one side, pushing the Durkans there. They obviously have got to this Miss Bess woman, who's, ready to, knock people out with billy clubs and everything else. Is there a feeling on the ground that, if they win, this could put back the city for many years to come and its progressive agenda?
Well, there's been a struggle, for a long time through the city council elections that were bankrolled by Amazon and by Kshama Sawant's efforts to try to tax Amazon, which, although the city council voted, unanimously for it, then turned around and rescinded their own vote. That's been going on for a long time. What I see right now is a real battle between the community and the police department, and the mayor, being the representative of the city government, is culpable for that. And so the fact that the kids on the street and the people who have been protesting don't believe that the Seattle Police Department has been reformed. They don't. Unfortunately, Jeff, the saddest part about all this, and, I'm talking to, people on the site from Black Lives Matter who told me, they really don't believe that even with these protests across the country, I mean, we saw what happened with Elijah McClain in Aurora, Colorado. People actually don't believe that the killing is going to stop. And that's sad. I mean, that's such a sad thing to hear coming from, a teenager or whatever, is that they really don't believe that the United States is a safe place for young black men or young black women when it comes to, dealing with police. And that's sad. That's what's got to change, Jeff. I mean, that whole perception that, the police are out of control. I mean, when I saw the Aurora, Colorado police, which is also a relatively progressive city, when I see these RoboCops, in the riot gear, storming up to stop a violin concert, I'm thinking, what the heck is going on with this country? When you have people who fight against who fight against fascism and who fight against racism and police brutality called terrorists by the right wing, I mean, what kind of country are we living in? What happened to our basic
so true.
Values? Democracy, accountability, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Where is that? Where are we at now, Jeff?
I think that we are fighting. If you want to think about it as white supremacy, you want to think about people who have been in power and been in charge, and they now see that we have had an African-American president. We almost had a woman president. That we see a young people in the streets, people who are 14, 15, 16 years of age, who are at this point in time really controlling the narrative. What we see in potentially of the defunding of the police department, I should say, in Minneapolis. I think that there are a lot of, whether you want to call them old timers or whether you want to talk about those who are part of the system, that they're trying to protect it and they'll do it any way possible. Or maybe in a lot of cases in police, you just have a lot of white supremacists, a lot of people who are associated with some very, very bad groups. You can name all of them, and they are going to use their ballywick, which is force, whether it's guns, whether it's billy clubs, whether it's chokeholds. Unless there's somebody that pushes back, and they're going to have to push back on them legally and fire some people and not let them get rehired by another police department. That's what we're coming down to, man. I mean, I really feel for what you guys are trying to do in Seattle. And I think you're on the front lines of this battle right now, because you're trying to sort of take back the streets.
Well, Jeff, it doesn't help when you have a president. It doesn't help when you have a president who not only seems to support the police no matter what, then also posts videos of people shouting white power, and then the next day has a video up there of a white couple trying to protect their mansion in St. Louis from a non-threat using weapons. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's like when the guy in the White House is setting that kind of a tone, I mean, what do you expect? There are a lot of people out there who feel enabled now to be racist and to berate and insult the Black Lives Matter protesters and Antifa or whatever, and all the other groups out there. But there are always going to be people who would take advantage of chaos to further their own ends, or people in government who, like you said, get their paycheck from the system, get all of their prestige and power from the system that's in place now, and are kind of loath to change it too much. They're kind of dragging their feet, and I see that a little bit with Mayor Durkan here in Seattle. Even with all of the criticism that she got from the Trump administration, and even with the fact that she still, at this point, has not swept the CHOP protest area, it's still, the tone that she's set is one of, well, we are just going to sort of dismiss this whole thing as if it didn't happen and move on. And you can't do that. I mean, this is a moment in history. I mean, the BBC is reporting about it this morning, Jeff. It's an international news. There's no way that people in Seattle, even if they happen to have a little sort of appealing attitude about this, are going to be able to sweep everything under the rug and pretend like CHOP didn't exist or doesn't exist now. The protesters are still up there. Their demands still haven't been met, and they're saying they're not going to leave. And one thing I think is really important is there's a huge mural that goes all the way down the street. I think people have probably seen it in national media. It's a beautiful mural that artists in Seattle put on the street itself between Broadway and 11th on Pine Street in Seattle. Very famous corridor there. And it's a really beautiful piece of art, and I really want to see that protected somehow. I mean, somehow the city has to make sure that there is First Amendment rights for people to peaceably assemble to address their government redress of grievances, number one. Number two, they need to stop attacking the protesters with the police. And I have to tell you this, yes, at night there have been shootings in the area or nearby, but during the day, it's actually been relatively safe, very safe actually for me, and more safe than when the police were at the East Precinct, because I was getting attacked with tear gas and flashbang grenades in the park. So for me personally, being there during the daytime, it's actually been much safer now that the police have left the area. So, there are many narratives and many stories to tell that haven't been told, and the corporate media is not doing a great job. I think by the time it gets to Reuters or Agence France-Presse or BBC, some of that has been sorted out and sifted out, and there's some truth coming out. But in general, people are in such a political battle in Seattle that it's hard to know who to believe.
And does it come along, Mark? Does it come along in this Amazon, Starbucks corporate world that the Durkans of the world and other Democratic corporate candidates get the money from them in the campaigns, and it's against the Savants, it's against the Bernie Sanders folks, it's against those that are fighting with BLM in their side, in the streets that have taken over parts of Capitol Hill? Is it that defined? Number one, the Black Lives Matter movement's protests in Seattle started because of racism and police brutality. So that's where their focus is. Right. Now, there are a lot of other issues surrounding Seattle politics, including the proposed tax on Amazon and other things. And by the way, there was a huge concert where Pearl Jam and my friends the Blacktones and some other great bands raised millions of dollars for COVID relief. So there are other things going on in the city. But in general, politically, Kshama Sawant is part of a group of people who were trying to change the face of politics at City Hall, and it's happening right in the middle of some major demonstrations, which have turned out to be quite tragic at times. But also, you have to give the protesters credit. They have held on to this area now for weeks against all sorts of right-wing propaganda, and Trump calling them terrorists and looters and all sorts of things. I mean, his latest tweet was, calling them anarchists and looters. But I haven't seen any looting going on there, Jeff. In fact, as I reported on my YouTube channel, there are actually some businesses nearby that are doing quite well because they're serving the protesters. And a lot of them are actually supporting the protesters. Although there is a major lawsuit that has been publicized in the corporate media, local businesses have gotten together and sued the mayor and Governor Jay Inslee for failing to clear the area, and they say that access to their businesses has been limited, etc. So we'll see where that goes, but it's a big political controversy no matter how you look at it. What most of the activists want to see is they want to see issues of police brutality and racism addressed directly by the city government here in Seattle. That's their goal. Right. All right, I want to take a quick call for you and then some breaking news. Charles Booker, unfortunately, has conceded the race to Ms. McGrath in the great state of Kentucky. I don't know how great it is with what has happened with the election stuff, but that's another story for another day, but that's the latest coming out of NBC News. Let's go to the great city of Chicago and talk to our good friend Rudy. Rudy, you have a thought or a question for our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield?
Yeah, Mark, how's the education system generally in the cities and the suburbs?
Mark?
Oh, that I expected you to have a big, long comment, Rudy, like usually. So you threw that at me too quickly. It just went right over my head like a pitched ball. I was like, whoa, what was that? So I missed it. Can you repeat it, please?
The education system. Go ahead. Yeah, it was a fastball right down the middle. It was regarding education system in the city of Seattle.
The public school system?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. There in Seattle and the suburbs.
Are you asking what the quality of education? Are the schools open?
Yeah,
what was the question?
The quality, exactly.
Yeah, the problem in Seattle is that the state Supreme Court has says that our funding for schools, which is based on these local votes in each district, these levies, is actually unconstitutional. So for rich neighborhoods, they have good schools. For poor neighborhoods, they have bad schools. That's pretty much how that works in Washington State. And you can check out all my stuff at Twitter. You can check out all this at Twitter and Facebook, by the way.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Rudy.
Let me say this. When I was in grade school, high school, etc., everyone got a good education in Chicago. My grade school was equal to a prep school today. So it's really gone to hell for some reason.
Yeah, well, a lot of that is race-related, and I don't think that they were probably doing the best job back then for people of color, Rudy, as well. But I hear you. I hear you. We have obviously decayed, and I think a lot of it is because of greed. Thank you for the call, Rudy. Mark, stay safe, my friend. Appreciate your time, and please check them out on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks, Mark. All the best.
Thanks, Jeff. Check us out at Democracy Watch News, too. We're doing podcasts, the Democracy podcast about this, so talk to you soon.
All the best, Mark Taylor-Canfield. Folks, just sort of recap what we've done today here. We're going to try to do this going forward. Look, we started to get a reality check with Dr. Cornel West. We got the inside news with our friends at the Lexington Herald leader, Linda Blackford. We then had a really great on a lot of different issues with Robert Craig. And again, Melissa Tomlinson in defending teachers, which have been attacked time and time again. And we wrap it up with Mark Taylor-Canfield on the issue of police reform. What we're trying to do here on the Jeff Santos Show is to give you as many opinions that you're not going to hear a lot of mainstream media. And that's what we're going to continue to do as we move forward into the month of July, which starts tomorrow. And we'll hopefully have some major announcements coming up in the month of July as well to sort of expand our platform. Keep on fighting, folks. That's what we ask you to do. And I want to thank Ron Kreider for producing this broadcast. I want to thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. Harvey K. will be with us, as will Mr. Scott. This is the Jeff Santos Show. My name is Jeff Santos, and I gotta go.
This is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network.